He studied the darkest corners of the human mind, took notes on patterns, profiles, theories on what drives someone to cross a line. In the daylight he asked questions. Behind closed doors, no one really knows. In the still hours before dawn, something happened. Something so quiet, so brutal. It wouldn't make noise until it was too late. A home, a college town, and a silence that swallowed the street. What followed wasn't just a manhunt or a mystery. It was a case that asked unsettling questions about knowledge, about intent, and about what can hide behind even the most studied eyes. Was it all coincidence? Or precision? Chance? Or calculation? And why, of all places, of all people, here? This isn't just about what was lost. It's about what still hasn't been found. This isn't just a crime story. It's a collision of science, suspicion, and silence. Tucked into the rolling hills of northwestern Idaho is a town that doesn't often make headlines. A place where neighbors wave, where students walk late at night with earbuds in, and where winter arrives like a quiet breath, dusting rooftops, silencing streets. Moscow. Population, just under 26,000. A town known more for its university than for its crime stats. A place that prides itself on safety and stillness. But in November of 2022, the stillness broke. That morning, for students, bright, beloved, full of promise, were no longer reachable. Their friends tried calling. Then came the knocks. Then the call. Just past noon, the first patrol car arrived. And by nightfall, the nation was watching. In a matter of hours, a small college town became the center of a mystery that would grip the country. A tragedy with more questions than answers. A crime scene with no named suspect, no known motive, and no apparent connection. In the days that followed, speculation flourished. Rumors took root. And yet, behind the noise, behind the headlines, were real people, real grief, and an investigation more complex than anyone could see from the outside. This documentary isn't here to dramatize. It's here to lay out what we know, what we don't, and what it all might mean. With care, with truth, and with the respect that every story like this deserves. Before the headlines, before the cameras, before the silence that changed everything, there were 4 lives, 4 stories, each full of light, laughter, and plans still unfolding. This isn't about how it ended. It's about who they were, and the love they left behind. Kaylee Goncalves was known for her spark. The 5th of 5 children, her family called her the firecracker. She radiated confidence and warmth, with a fierce loyalty to the people she loved. A senior at the University of Idaho, Kaylee was just weeks away from graduation. She had landed a new job, bought a new car, and was preparing to move to Texas, to chase bigger dreams. She made you feel like you were the only person in the room, her sister said. She was magnetic. Her bond with Madison Mogen went beyond friendship. It was sisterhood in every way but blood. Madison Mogen, Maddie to those who knew her, was calm, composed, and deeply kind. The daughter of a close-knit family, she was raised with love and an instinct to take care of others. She loved photography, music, her circle of friends. And Kaylee? They were inseparable. They were always together, one friend recalled. If you saw one, the other wasn't far behind. Maddie and Kaylee had chosen to spend that weekend together. A final visit, a final memory, before going separate ways. That choice would unknowingly write the final chapter of their story. Xana Kernodle was energy in motion. Vibrant, athletic, always moving, always smiling. Those who knew her say she lived with intensity and kindness. The kind that left an imprint on every room she entered. A junior majoring in marketing, Xana was fiercely independent. But she also had a soft side, especially when it came to Ethan. She was so in love, a close friend shared. She glowed when she talked about him. That night, she was with the person who made her happiest, the one who always made her laugh. Ethan Chapin was one of 3, a triplet, a teammate, a light in the lives of those around him. He was tall, full of humor, and endlessly good-natured. A freshman majoring in recreation, sport, and tourism management. A brother, a son, a boyfriend. He was the best kid. His mother said, every day with Ethan was a gift. His presence was effortless, easy to love. He didn't just bring joy, he was joy. For young lives, interwoven by friendship, love, and ordinary days. All gone in one unimaginable moment. What they left behind was not just sorrow, but a community determined never to forget. The night began like any other. Friends, laughter, plans for tomorrow. And then, the unexpected shift. A change that no one saw coming. Kaylee Goncalves and Madison Mogen, they were together as they often were. That evening, they made their way to a local food truck on the corner of Main Street. It was cold, but laughter filled the air as they chatted with friends. It was a night like any other for them. They had their food, their plans. And the night was still young. Xana Kernodle and Chapin were also out that night, enjoying the last few hours of a weekend before the academic grind returned. They attended a party with friends, a celebration of sorts, a bit of joy before the clock ran out. It's important to remember that for these four, the evening was not out of the ordinary. Their lives, filled with plans, routines, and bright futures, continued on, unaware of what was coming. But something else was happening behind the scenes. By the time the night grew late, the phone calls began to slow. The texts and messages no longer returned. It was then that the final movements were set in motion. The path each of them would take that night was now invisible to their friends, their families, but not to someone else. The police logs from that night tell us little more than what we already know. Small moments, isolated encounters, that seemed insignificant at the time. Witnesses recount seeing things that didn't match up. Neighbors heard what they thought were strange sounds, but no one really reacted. A door closed too hard. A set of footsteps, too far, too late. And yet, despite the chilling hours that passed, the silence, the small disturbances, there was no way to know that before the sun rose, everything would change. By morning, the quiet broke, and so did the town. The calm that once defined Moscow was shattered forever. The investigation was just beginning. But by now, Moscow, this sleepy town, had already become a part of something far larger than itself. A mystery waiting for answers. The town of Moscow, Idaho, a place known for its quiet streets, its welcoming atmosphere, was now the center of a storm. In the span of just one morning, everything had changed. The noise of the outside world, the national gaze, now cast a shadow over the small community. The calm was gone. The first police press conferences came quickly, and with them more questions than answers. Law enforcement stood at the podium, delivering carefully worded statements, each more cryptic than the last. What happened? Who was responsible? Where were the answers? At this point in the investigation, we are not ruling anything out. But for the public, those words did little to ease the growing anxiety. Every piece of information released seemed to raise new concerns. Were they safe in their own homes? Could this happen again? The streets of Moscow became a place for questions, but not necessarily answers. Public confusion spread quickly. Rumors ran rampant. Was this a targeted attack? Was the perpetrator someone they knew? Theories swirled faster than the snow that had blanketed the town that morning. Everyone's looking at their neighbors differently now, one local said. Who can you trust? Amid the chaos, the families of the victims began to speak out. They were thrust into the spotlight, forced to grieve in front of a nation. For them, this wasn't about speculation or rumors. It was about their children, their brothers, their sisters. They were lost, but they were also determined to make sure their stories were told. We loved her, the mother of Kaylee shared. She was just starting to live her dreams. No one deserves this. As the investigation unfolded, the media response intensified. Every shred of information was dissected, analyzed, and magnified. But with that came an unsettling wave of speculation. Theories are running wild online. Everyone is asking, who did this? Could this be the work of someone close to the victims? Or is there a deeper connection? While the truth remained locked in the hands of the investigators, the public was already creating their own narrative. But what was fact? And what was fiction? The line between speculation and reality began to blur. Who was telling the truth? Who had the answers? And as the investigation pressed on, the question remained, who could have committed such a senseless act? The hunt for answers was just beginning, but the questions kept piling up. By the time the media frenzy reached its peak, the quiet town of Moscow was no longer just a place on the map. It had become a focal point, a place of mystery, of grief, of unresolved answers. And the nation was watching. Before there was a name, there were questions. Who could carry out such a calculated act and vanish back into obscurity? The trail was cold until it wasn't. And when authorities finally zeroed in on a suspect, that suspect didn't look like what most expected. He wasn't running. He was studying. Bryan Kohberger was born in 1994 in eastern Pennsylvania. Raised in the Pocono region, his early life appeared unremarkable. Family records describe a household that was middle-class, structured. A place where expectations were met with silence rather than expression. Those who knew him from childhood recall two versions of Bryan: a boy with sharp intelligence, and a boy who often seemed alone in his thoughts. In school, Bryan kept a low profile. Former classmates would later describe him as quiet, almost invisible. He was the kind of student who rarely spoke unless prompted. And when he did, the words came measured and calculated. Some recalled a stark transformation during his teenage years. There were whispers of struggles, mental, emotional, but few details and even fewer people who stayed close enough to see inside. Public records show a mostly clean slate. No major infractions. No bright warning signs. Just subtle ripples beneath the surface. His academic path was anything but aimless. Bryan pursued a degree in psychology at DeSales University. Later, he earned a master's in criminal justice, immersing himself in coursework on criminal behavior and the inner workings of the mind. His professors described him as sharp, curious, and methodical. He wasn't just absorbing theories, he was dissecting them. After completing his graduate work, Bryan moved across the country. In the fall of 2022, he enrolled in the PhD program in criminology at Washington State University. He was just 10 miles away from Moscow, Idaho. But Bryan's fascination with the criminal mind wasn't just academic. Months before the tragedy, he posted a questionnaire for former offenders, asking them deeply personal questions. How did you choose your victim? What emotions did you feel before and after? The survey, hosted online as part of a student research project, raised little alarm at the time. It was framed as an attempt to understand the psychology of crime. But in hindsight, many would wonder if there was something more behind the questions. Those who interacted with him in Pullman described him in familiar terms: intelligent, focused, but not exactly warm. He was the guy who stayed after class and asked really detailed questions, but never made eye contact. He wasn't popular, but he wasn't ostracized. He was there, observing, always thinking. Some remembered moments that now feel chilling in retrospect. Comments about how criminals make mistakes, or detailed analyses of news stories involving violence. But at the time, it all seemed like part of the coursework. Bryan Kohberger studied the mind of a criminal. He was drawn to the psychology of transgression, the calculus of control. And all the while, he remained hidden in plain sight. What no one knew then was just how closely he might have been watching. Absolutely, here is your next documentary section. To understand someone's path, you often begin at home. Not with excuses, not with judgment, but with context. Because even the most isolated minds are shaped, somewhere, by the world around them. Bryan Kohberger grew up in a working-class family in the heart of Pennsylvania's Pocono region. His father worked in maintenance, his mother a paraprofessional in the school system. They were not people of wealth, but of stability, earning a living, raising their children, and staying out of the spotlight. The family home, a two-story house nestled on a quiet street, was neither lavish nor run-down. It was ordinary, unremarkable in every way but one. It became the subject of intense national attention. Bryan wasn't an only child. He grew up with siblings, including at least one sister with ties to the arts and performance. Local accounts suggest a family that kept mostly to themselves. Neighbors reported no frequent disturbances, no dramatic conflicts. Just a family navigating the demands of daily life. School lunches, work shifts, and the quiet routines of a Pennsylvania upbringing. No criminal records among them. No household incidents that raised public alarm. Just a home like many others. Until it wasn't. Years before his name would make headlines, Bryan did have minor, documented encounters with law enforcement. In 2013, public records show he was involved in a nonviolent incident related to theft. A charge considered low-level, and later resolved through the legal process. There were also traffic-related citations over the years. Nothing in those records suggested a pattern of aggression or harm. But taken together in hindsight, even the smallest brush with the system has drawn new scrutiny. And yet, nothing in those papers spoke of what was to come. In the early days following the arrest, the Kohberger family remained silent. No interviews, no defenses, no denials. Only later did a brief statement emerge, shared through an attorney, a confirmation that they stood behind due process, that they loved their son, but that they were committed to cooperating fully with the investigation. We will continue to let the legal process unfold, and as a family, we remain supportive of Bryan and love him deeply. There are no easy answers here. Only facts, publicly known, carefully examined. What role a family plays in shaping a future is never simple to define. What is clear is that Bryan Kohberger's story did not begin in isolation. But whatever darkness emerged, it did so in silence. In every story there are the people who knew you, and the ones who thought they did. With Bryan Kohberger, his presence lingered in classrooms, discussion boards, hallways lined with behavioral theory textbooks. But when people looked back, what did they really see? Peers from both DeSales University and Washington State University describe Bryan as quiet, observant, often drifting through the social current without making much of a ripple. Some remembered him as polite, others as cold. Classmates reported occasional odd comments, a sharp intellect and an intensity that could either impress or unnerve, depending on the room. He wasn't the guy you partied with. He was the guy who stayed after to talk about neural pathways or forensic patterns. In academia he excelled. A master's degree in criminal justice from DeSales University. A PhD candidate in criminology at Washington State. He studied the architecture of crime, how people choose victims, why they commit violent acts, how patterns form before behavior breaks into action. In one of his graduate research projects, Bryan posted an anonymous survey to online forums. It asked participants who had previously committed crimes to answer detailed questions about emotion, about decision-making, about the aftermath. The survey sparked discussion online. Some saw it as academic rigor. Others, in hindsight, saw something darker. But at the time there was no alarm, no report, no public concern. Because sometimes when the words are wrapped in academia, they don't look like a warning. One professor described Bryan as highly intelligent, but socially detached. Another remembered him as deeply inquisitive, especially about the minds of those who crossed the line. But no red flags. Not then. Not in any official way. It raises the question, were there subtle signs, or are we only searching for them now? Social circles remain thin. No documented romantic relationships. No known close friendships during his PhD program. Just classmates, professors, neighbors, all left with fragments, trying to reassemble a picture of a man who, it seems, spent more time studying behavior than sharing in it. But was that the warning? Or the camouflage? In the absence of connection, was something else taking shape? In the silence left behind, technology begins to whisper. When no one sees you, the towers do, the cameras do, the digital thread you didn't notice starts weaving itself into something undeniable. In late November, investigators began quietly building a timeline, not from eyewitness accounts, but from devices. They pulled tower data from across the region. One particular number was pinging in and out of Moscow, long before the crime occurred. And again, on the morning it shattered the calm. Law enforcement, using cell phone data triangulation, began to see what no one else could. A digital footprint, neither loud nor confident, but precise. Across small businesses, street corners, and campus parking lots, the past lives in frames. A white Hyundai Elantra. Repeated sightings. Speed. Direction. And the most haunting detail. A silent consistency across different angles, as if a route was known, practiced, timed. Investigators collected hours of footage, tracking movements before and after the window of the incident. Even grainy clips told stories of location, of timing, of proximity. The suspect didn't speak, but the vehicle may have. Thousands of white Hyundai Elantras were registered in the region, but only one had no front plate. Only one appeared again and again on footage. From that, a plate. From the plate, a registration. And with it, a name. Not an arrest. Not yet. But momentum. A path through data that circled tighter and tighter. And Bryan Kohberger was now on the radar. As the investigation intensified, so did public fascination with how the case was unfolding. Not through fingerprints on glass, but towers, traffic cams, and tech. In forums and comment sections, people pieced together timelines, tracking the very methods detectives were quietly using in real time. Technology, once background noise, became the loudest voice in the room. But for all its power, digital data only tells you where. It doesn't tell you why. That question still loomed. Yet even as the puzzle neared its edges, with coordinates, vehicles, and signals clicking into place, one final thread remained. The oldest forensic tool in the book. The one that speaks from the inside out. It didn't scream. It didn't shout. It whispered. In a case crowded with speculation, the most compelling evidence barely took up space. Just a few skin cells, invisible to the eye, but impossible to ignore. According to legal filings, a single piece of key evidence was located at the scene, a knife sheath resting near one of the victims. What mattered wasn't the sheath itself. It was what had been left behind. Touch DNA. Minuscule skin particles possibly left during contact. No visible blood, no graphic traces. But enough to be swabbed, tested, and preserved. In a controlled forensic lab, those samples were compared against a sample taken from items discarded at Bryan Kohberger's parents' residence. The result, according to official filings, was a statistical match. Not absolute, but overwhelming in its probability. Touch DNA doesn't require blood, hair, or fluid. Just contact. When a person touches an object, skin cells can transfer. And in rare but forensic valid cases, that trace is enough. Using advanced polymerase chain reaction (PCR) techniques, those skin cells are amplified, revealing a DNA profile unique to a single individual. It's delicate science. It requires strict chain of custody, laboratory protocols, and the absence of contamination. In this case, lab reports confirmed that the DNA found on the knife sheath had a strong association with the profile developed from family lineage and direct testing. From the moment the sheath was recovered, its journey was documented. From scene to storage, from lab intake to court submission, every move logged, every handler recorded. In legal terms, this is called the chain of custody, a critical safeguard to ensure evidence is never compromised. And in this case, nothing reported in open records suggested a break in that chain. DNA doesn't reveal intention. It doesn't speak to motive. It simply answers one question. Was this person present? But even that can echo across an entire investigation. In the case of Bryan Kohberger, this single forensic connection became a cornerstone, not a conviction, not a conclusion, but a moment where the story of data met the story of biology. And from that moment forward, everything changed. It was over 2,000 miles away from the scene, a snowy Pennsylvania town, quiet, familiar, and unaware of what was building beneath the surface. The case that had gripped an entire nation was about to take its sharpest turn yet. By mid-December 2022, investigators had begun focusing their attention on a suspect residing in the Pocono Mountains of Pennsylvania. The name had not yet been made public. No charges had been filed. But behind the scenes, a cross-agency surveillance effort had quietly begun. Federal, state, and local law enforcement worked in coordination, observing the suspect's behavior without raising alarm. What they were watching for was confirmation. What they were preparing for was the next step. According to publicly released reports, Bryan Kohberger had returned home to Pennsylvania with his family during the holiday break. Neighbors reported seeing nothing out of the ordinary. Local businesses offered no red flags. But surveillance continued. Agents monitored the property, tracked vehicle activity, and gathered waste materials for forensic testing, a method known as discarded DNA comparison. No confrontation, no spotlight, just observation and quiet collection. In the early hours of December 30, 2022, law enforcement made their move. It was 1:30 a.m. The quiet was broken not by sirens, but by a knock, a warrant, and an arrest. According to official documents, Bryan Kohberger was taken into custody without incident. No resistance, no statements. For the investigators, it was the culmination of weeks of digital, forensic, and physical tracking. For the public, it was the first time they heard the name. News of the arrest spread rapidly. The country that had waited for answers now faced new questions. Families of the victims expressed measured relief. Alongside heartbreak, statements were released, reminding the public that the pain remained, and the process had only just begun. Kohberger's family, through counsel, asked for due process and extended condolences to the families affected. Court dates were scheduled. Extradition began. The story shifted once more, from investigation to prosecution. But even in custody, the case was far from over. What followed was a closer look at everything that had led to this moment, and everything that might still remain unrevealed. Justice in America does not rush. It does not assume. It proceeds, one step at a time. For the families who had waited for answers, and for a nation still echoing with questions, the arrest of Bryan Kohberger was not the end of the road. It was the beginning of a longer, more complex journey. After his arrest in Pennsylvania, Kohberger waived his right to contest extradition. It was a quiet hearing, brief, procedural. He expressed willingness to return to Idaho, to face the charges filed against him. Authorities arranged for secure transport. By the first week of January 2023, Bryan Kohberger had been transferred to the Lada County Jail in Moscow, Idaho. With that move, the legal process officially began. January 5th, Kohberger appeared before a judge for the first time in Idaho. The courtroom was quiet, its gravity unmistakable. The charges were read. 4 counts of first-degree homicide, 1 count of felony burglary. No statements were made. No confessions offered. A preliminary hearing was set, and then the waiting resumed. What followed was a series of scheduled appearances, pretrial motions, and legal positioning from both the defense and the prosecution. Each side requested additional time to examine evidence, to build arguments, to navigate what would become one of the most closely watched trials in recent memory. Legal teams filed notices for protective orders. Certain documents were sealed. Hearing dates were shifted, sometimes more than once. Some delays sparked frustration. Others were expected. But in the legal system, thoroughness outweighs urgency. On May 22, 2023, Kohberger was formally arraigned. He stood before the court and declined to enter a plea. In such cases, the court enters one on the defendant's behalf. Not guilty. It was a legal formality, but also a turning point. The stage was now set. Trial preparation would begin in earnest. And the weight of the case, already heavy, deepened. In the United States, every person is presumed innocent until proven otherwise. The system is designed to protect fairness, to shield against error, to allow both sides the chance to be fully heard. As public interest in the case intensified, officials reminded the public and the press, justice is not driven by emotion. It is led by law. And as this trial approached, what mattered most was what could be proven within the courtroom walls. For the families, for the community, and for the accused, the process was only just beginning. In court, silence carries weight. And words? Each one is chosen carefully, deliberately. From motions filed to evidence challenged, what the public doesn't always see is the meticulous dance of legal tension beneath the headlines. This is where strategy lives, where facts meet theory, where every detail, no matter how small, can shift the course of a trial. As the trial date moved closer, attorneys on both sides filed a series of motions. Each one sought to define the limits, what the jury would hear, what would be held back, and how the case would be framed. These were not just procedural, they were pivotal. One motion challenged the inclusion of online purchase records. Investigators had obtained a history of items allegedly linked to the incident, purchases made months before. The defense requested this evidence be excluded, citing potential prejudice, and questioning the relevance without direct context. The court deliberated, not on guilt, but on whether the evidence met the legal threshold for inclusion. Another motion centered around cell phone data. Location records, activity logs, tower pings. They offered a digital map of movements. But interpretation is key. Was the data precise enough? Was its collection lawful under search standards? The defense challenged portions of the data's use, while prosecutors argued it provided necessary context for patterns in behavior. In this courtroom, technology itself was on trial. Then came questions around what someone said they saw, or thought they heard. An eyewitness account, delivered in the early days of the investigation, became a point of contention. Could stress alter memory? Was the timeline reliable? The defense argued the statements might introduce doubt without proof. The prosecution insisted they were key. The judge was tasked with weighing reliability, while upholding a core legal principle: fairness above all. This case wasn't about theatrics. It was about precision. Prosecutors focused on a pattern: movement, data, science. The defense emphasized what wasn't there: motive, a clear eyewitness, or direct admission. Their roles were not personal. They were structural, each side an essential part of a system built to find truth. And in that room, every objection, every line of questioning, every pause, mattered. The person at the defense table is not defined by the charge. They are not convicted by public opinion. They are presumed innocent, until proven otherwise in a court of law. That is not a loophole. It is the foundation of justice. In a world where narratives move quickly, the courtroom remains still, deliberate, methodical, measured. The motion set the tone. But the trial would reveal the strategy in motion. In the world of true crime, labels get used freely. Psychopath, sociopath, monster. They're words that ignite headlines and shape perceptions before facts even settle. But inside a courtroom, those words can shift more than public opinion. They can jeopardize fairness. And that, according to law, is where the line is drawn. Before the trial could begin, the judge made a ruling, one that echoed through every future moment of the case. Certain psychological terms, commonly used in media and casual commentary, would be excluded from courtroom vocabulary, not because they weren't powerful, but precisely because they were. Words like psychopath and sociopath carry psychological weight, but also cultural judgment. Unless supported by verified expert testimony, used in a clinical, relevant, and admissible context, they were off limits. This wasn't about silencing truth. It was about safeguarding fairness. In psychological circles, terms like antisocial personality disorder have clear diagnostic criteria, but the terms psychopath or sociopath have no official legal or clinical definition in court, at least not without expert backing. If said recklessly, they can imply something no jury is allowed to assume: intent, motive, or mental state, without evidence. And without caution, one word could cloud a verdict. That's why the courtroom is careful. Not cautious out of fear, but out of duty. Attorneys, on both sides, walk a legal and ethical tightrope. They must argue passionately, without leaning into assumption. They present facts, not feelings, data, not diagnosis, and their words must always respect that line. The court exists to find the truth, not to reinforce suspicion with sound bites. Outside the courtroom, the language we use in true crime discourse often strays far from what's admissible in court. But when those conversations spill into public forums, they create an echo. And that echo can influence juror selection, public safety concerns, and a defendant's right to due process. This isn't about sympathy. It's about structure. The system was built to slow down judgment and speed up truth, whether the public agrees with the ruling or not. The courtroom isn't a place for shortcuts. It's a space where emotion is tempered, where justice is shaped in measured tones. Because when the stakes are this high, words don't just describe, they decide. In any courtroom, every detail matters. Not just the evidence presented, but the context behind it. And in recent filings, the defense subtly introduced a term that reshapes how we interpret behavior: autism spectrum disorder. But what does that mean? And what doesn't it mean? When it comes to a trial of this weight, reports indicate the defense may present a clinical diagnosis, suggesting the defendant is on the autism spectrum. This isn't framed as a justification, nor as an explanation for the charges. It's what's known in legal terms as a mitigating factor, a piece of context that could be used to inform understanding of behavior, communication, and interpretation of intent. In some cases, this information is offered, not to ask for forgiveness, but to promote fairness. In U.S. law, mental or neurological conditions can be brought up to provide insight, particularly during sentencing phases, or when explaining social misunderstandings or atypical behavior. But crucially, being on the spectrum does not create immunity from responsibility, nor can it be used by prosecutors as evidence against someone. That protection is built into the rules of evidence to avoid discrimination and bias. Autism spectrum disorder, ASD, is a neurodevelopmental condition. It can affect how someone processes social cues, responds to sensory input, or navigates complex interpersonal interactions. But autism does not equal violence. It does not predict danger. And no clinical expert would argue otherwise. Its mention in court is not about guilt or innocence, but about helping explain potential misunderstandings, misread cues, or differences in affect or behavior that might seem unusual to a jury. When neurodiversity intersects with the legal system, judges, juries, and attorneys are faced with a dual task: to protect the rights of all individuals, regardless of cognitive or neurological status, and to weigh the facts fairly and without bias. It's not easy, but it's essential. In the court of public opinion, terms like autism often spark confusion, but inside a courtroom, every diagnosis must be handled with respect and precision. A defendant's neurological profile might explain behavior, but it never decides guilt. Only evidence does that. As this case unfolds, Every factor will be weighed carefully and under the law. And while medical terms may enter the conversation, this courtroom will not be governed by labels. It will be guided by facts. When a crime like this happens, it isn't just a headline. It's not just a case number or a legal proceeding. It's 4 families left in the wake of a tragedy that no one could have predicted. In the months following the deaths, heartfelt tributes poured in from those who knew them best, their families. Kaylee's parents spoke of a daughter who dreamed of a future filled with joy, travel and success. Her passion for life and love of family were constants in every corner of her world. Madison's mother recalled her daughter's radiant smile, the way she lit up every room she entered. She was a friend to everyone, always a shoulder to lean on. Xana's parents shared memories of their vibrant daughter, her spirit, her athleticism, her love of the outdoors. And Ethan's family described him as a young man whose potential was boundless, a triplet who loved his siblings fiercely, a student athlete with dreams of a bright future. But while grief is private, legacy can be shared. In the wake of tragedy, the families chose to honor their loved ones in powerful ways. Kaylee's family started a foundation to help support young women pursuing their dreams, a tribute to the bright future Kaylee never had the chance to experience. Madison's family organized events to raise awareness for mental health, a cause Madison had championed throughout her life. Xana's family poured their energy into promoting outdoor education, a tribute to her love for adventure. And Ethan's family created a scholarship fund in his honor, helping young athletes follow in his footsteps. As their legacies took shape, a broader conversation began. It wasn't just about 4 lives lost. It was about safety. On campus, in student housing, and in the spaces where young people should feel protected. Colleges across the nation were forced to confront questions of security, emergency protocols, and whether they were doing enough to protect the students under their care. These families became advocates, not just for justice, but for change, for the future. The impact of this case extended far beyond the town of Moscow. It spread to communities and campuses across the country. It became a call for awareness, a demand for more robust safety measures in educational spaces. Though the world may have moved on, the memories of Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan remain, woven into the fabric of countless lives. Their families are left to carry their legacies forward, and to fight for the changes that might prevent this from happening again. This is not the end of their story. It's just the beginning. Coming up next, we turn our attention to the community of Moscow, and how its residents have learned to heal. We'll explore the delicate balance between remembering the past and rebuilding the future. In today's digital age, the public's voice is louder than ever. What happens in a courtroom may be dictated by law, but what happens in the court of public opinion can shape the entire narrative. And in the case of the murders in Moscow, speculation spread like wildfire. As the investigation unfolded, social media platforms buzzed with theories, opinions, and conclusions, often drawn far before the facts had been established. From Reddit threads to YouTube videos, each new detail was dissected, analyzed, and often overinterpreted. While some online discussions provided insight, others spiraled into speculation that went far beyond the evidence available at the time. The pressure on law enforcement, on the victims' families, and on the accused was amplified by the constant stream of online commentary. In the realm of true crime, commentary is a delicate matter. It's one thing to seek the truth, but quite another to sensationalize, misinterpret, or exploit the pain of others. True crime content, especially when it involves real victims, requires a level of ethical responsibility. It's essential that we take care to avoid jumping to conclusions, or creating stories based on incomplete information. Every word, every detail, it all contributes to the public understanding of a case. So, the responsibility lies with creators, journalists, and the public alike, to be aware of the consequences their words can have. As much as we may want answers, the law must move at its own pace. Impatience can cloud judgment and compromise justice. The facts matter. And while the desire to understand the story is natural, we must respect the process, allowing the facts to emerge in their time, without forcing conclusions prematurely. In this case, as with any other, the truth will come when the evidence is fully understood, and that's when justice can truly be served. The role of the public in the narrative cannot be overstated. A case like this, high-profile, heartbreaking, and complex, can easily become a media circus. But for the families involved, for the accused, and for the community, The pursuit of truth must come above all. Because at the end of the day, the outcome of this case will not be decided by tweets, by headlines, or by online polls. It will be decided by facts, evidence, and the law. As we close this chapter of the case, we are reminded of the importance of balance. It's easy to get caught up in the frenzy, to want answers, to seek clarity when the fog of uncertainty remains thick. But in true crime, the pursuit of justice is never a race. It's a journey. And the most responsible way forward is with patience, with respect, and with a commitment to the facts. Next, we'll look at the ongoing trial and what the future holds for all involved. The road to resolution may be long, but with each step we draw closer to the truth. As the legal process unfolds, the stage is now set for what will be one of the most closely watched trials in recent history. The courtroom where truth, evidence, and testimony will collide, and where the questions that have lingered for months will finally begin to be answered. The first major event in the trial is the selection of the jury. It's a process that will begin in July 2025, where a panel of ordinary citizens will be tasked with evaluating the evidence presented and determining the fate of Bryan Kohberger. This jury, like all in America, will follow the principle of innocent until proven guilty. Their role is not to speculate or assume, but to listen to the facts and weigh the evidence with an open mind. The trial itself will begin on August 11, 2025. A date that has already sparked anticipation and discussion across the nation. Every moment in that courtroom will matter. Every argument, every piece of evidence will shape the direction of the case. The prosecution will work to prove its case. The defense will mount its challenges, and the jury will listen, analyze, and ultimately decide whether the charges against Bryan Kohberger are substantiated. This trial will explore several crucial aspects. The motive. What, if anything, drove Bryan Kohberger to allegedly commit these crimes? The timeline, how events unfolded, step by step, from the victim's last moments to the discovery of the bodies. And the credibility of the evidence, was it handled properly? Was it irrefutable? How does the DNA, surveillance footage, and witness testimony all piece together? Each of these elements will be scrutinized, as the legal process ensures fairness and rigor in pursuit of justice. Throughout the trial, it's important to remember one fundamental truth: the presumption of innocence. This principle is the cornerstone of our legal system, ensuring that every defendant receives a fair trial. Bryan Kohberger, like anyone accused of a crime, is entitled to this presumption. The prosecution bears the burden of proof, and it will be their responsibility to demonstrate guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Until that proof is established, Kohberger will remain innocent in the eyes of the law. As the days tick down to the start of the trial, the world watches. What will the trial reveal? What new information will emerge? How will the jury weigh the evidence presented? This is not just the story of one accused individual, but the story of 4 young lives lost, of families seeking justice, and of a community hoping for answers. The path to justice is never easy, and the journey is far from over. But as we look ahead, one thing is clear: the truth, however long it takes to uncover, will always rise to the surface. We've examined the evidence. We've followed the timeline. But even now, so much remains uncertain. What was the true motive? Why did Bryan Kohberger allegedly do this? What were the precise moments leading up to the victims' tragic deaths? How did everything unfold in the quiet town of Moscow, Idaho? How much of the story is still hidden? What details will emerge in the courtroom? And most importantly, will the answers we seek bring closure to those who need it most? It's natural to ask these questions. We're all searching for understanding. But what happens when the answers are still out of reach? The truth, real, unembellished, and raw, is still being uncovered. We know some facts, but there are gaps, mysteries yet to unravel. The legal process will continue, and with it, the search for clarity. What truly matters right now is the pursuit of truth. In time, a courtroom will weigh every piece of evidence, and a jury will decide what the future holds. Until then, we hold on to the principles of justice and respect for the lives lost: Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan. What do you think of all this? Do you have your own theories about what happened? Have you ever found yourself caught in a situation that seemed suspicious but couldn't quite put your finger on it? Have you ever ignored warning signs, perhaps only realizing later how dangerous they were? Could things have turned out differently if someone had noticed the subtle signs? Have you ever been in a place where you felt you could have helped but didn't know how? These are the questions we should all ask ourselves. Because the more we learn, the better we can understand the warning signs. And, more importantly, Help others before it's too late. If you're watching this and you care about the truth, about justice, about saving others from harm, subscribing to this channel is one small action you can take to be a part of something larger. Every subscription helps bring this story, and others like it, into the light. Every like, every comment, every share could make the difference in someone's life. So what are you waiting for? By subscribing, you help spread awareness, reach more people, and possibly save someone from danger. Thank you for watching. If you believe in in-depth, respectful coverage of true crime, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you have thoughts on this case, your theories, your reflections, share them with us in the comments. We'll continue to follow this case as it unfolds, and together we'll search for the truth,